Welcome back to Historical Veracity. You're watching Land of History, Israel's Conquest and Biblical Archaeology Unveiled. Today, in Episode 3, we dive into the testimonies to the presence of Israel in the land. Join us as we explore groundbreaking archaeological discoveries that reveal the layers of history hidden beneath the land of Israel. From ancient inscriptions to the echoes of biblical narratives, let's uncover the past together. Ready? Let's get started. Numerous archaeological findings prove the existence of the children of Israel in the land from the 10th century BCE onwards. The most famous testimony to the presence of Israel in its land is the Merneptah Stele from the 13th century, during Merneptah's military campaign in Israel, which states, "Israel is laid waste, its seed is not." This is not a reconstruction or a guess but a political fact told by the king of the Egyptian Empire. But even before this, Egyptian kings testified about the children of Israel in their land. Seti I at the end of the 10th century BCE talks about a punitive expedition to Jarmuth, in the territory of Issachar, and mentions names that correspond to the tribes of Asher and Judah, and the name Asher. It is hard not to see this as evidence of conquest during this period. The Anastasi Papyrus from the beginning of the 13th century incidentally mentions the prince of the tribe, Asher, in the land of Canaan, among other sources. The inscription of Amenhotep III, king in the 10th century BCE, mentions land of Yahweh inhabited by Shasu, marauders. And from the list of the days of Ramesses II, the 12th century, the Shasu of Yahweh are mentioned, from which we learn about the worship of Yahweh with his explicit name already in this period. Joshua son of Nun. Besides the name Yeshua in the Amarna letters, there is direct evidence for Joshua son of Nun himself, known in the ancient world. Historians such as John of Antioch, Suidas, and the Byzantine historian Procopius, three independent sources unaware of each other, testify to a Phoenician inscription found in North Africa, "We the Canaanites who were pursued by Joshua the robber," according to the Girgashite legend mentioned before, but not during the conquest, fled to Africa. The implications of Joshua's existence, originally called Hoshea as recounted in the Torah, can be seen in the fact that the name Hoshea is found in many places in excavations, and it is especially common among the sons of Ephraim. Another report describes the discovery of Joshua's tomb during the French archaeologist Félicien de Saulcy's journey to Israel in 1863. While excavating in the area of Judah, he received information about another researcher named Gairin, who excavated at Khirbet Tibnah, identified by some as Timnath-Serah, on August 31, 1863. Gairin discovered a stele built in the oldest Phoenician style, including countless sockets for small lamps inside the tombs and in front of them, a large amount of flint knives, like those found in the Jordan Valley around Gilgal. Gairin and de Saulcy connected this with the tradition about Joshua's burial in Timnath-Serah, Joshua 24:30, and with him were buried the swords of the rock dwellers that are there to this day, Septuagint Joshua 24:30. The incident was reported in newspapers of the time. Archaeological science was not developed at that time, and no formal excavations were conducted, so this finding was never examined or verified. The land of Israel was subject to antiquities looting for many centuries, and it is likely that many other findings that could have shed light on our history were lost or permanently damaged. For example, the results of the excavations in Shechem by the expedition of Selen and Ettinger, who discovered 2 written tablets, were destroyed in the bombing of Berlin in 1943. The entry into the land of Israel. According to the description in the Torah and Joshua, the children of Israel entered the land from the east, gathered in Shechem, and from there spread to other parts of the land. Indeed, the archaeological survey shows that the point of origin of the settlements is in the area of Shechem. But the Torah and Joshua also describe a ceremony to establish the nation, which was divided into 2 parts. First, as commanded by the Torah, the children of Israel gathered at Mount Ebal, erected an altar there, wrote the book of the Torah on the plaster of the altar, and proclaimed in the ears of the people a list of commandments, among them, "Cursed be he who does not uphold the words of this Torah." Secondly, the people gathered in the temple of Shechem, and Joshua made a covenant with them. The story of the altar at Mount Ebal is unique. It is not about a site that was holy to the people of Israel at any stage. From Joshua chapter 8 onwards, Mount Ebal is not mentioned at all. Not only was it not holy, there was no settlement there. It was just a desolate mountain for thousands of years. There is no basis for activity on this mountain, other than the initiation ceremony described in Joshua and commanded in the Torah. And if indeed Joshua built an altar on Mount Ebal, the only reason that could lead the Israeli center in nearby Shechem to abandon this altar is the law of the Torah, which requires sacrifices to be offered only in Shiloh, not anywhere else. If indeed this story happened, we would expect to find on Mount Ebal the remains of the altar, when the signs of its use overlap with only one generation, the generation of the Exodus from Egypt. Indeed, in the 1980s, the archaeological expedition led by Professor Zertal discovered such a site on Mount Ebal. The site was excavated over 8 seasons, and the excavation report presents unequivocal claims regarding the identity of the site and its use. See also Zertal's article, The Cultic Site on Mount Ebal. What was the site used for? Not for regular dwelling, Zertal determines. There is no trace of a variety of animals that are commonly found in the natural environment, no females, no adult animals used for work as usual, and only pure species are found. The site is very small, and it was not used over many generations. Only one generation used it, but it was not destroyed or conquered. There is no layer of destruction. It was concealed. Someone took the trouble to cover it with a layer of stones and conceal it forever. How do we know the use was cultic? The altar was filled with huge amounts of cultic remains, ash, and bones of male pure animals at a young age. Many remains of offerings presented to the place were found buried in the ground, as well as incense tools. In contrast, there is no natural use, no water wells, no various utensils. The structure is oriented to the 4 cardinal directions, as is the way of the ancient temples. In which short period was the site active? 2 Egyptian scarabs were found in it, both dated to around the 13th century BCE. Is the site Israeli? Well, there is no Canaanite parallel to such an altar. Of course, there are no god images and no hint or trace of a statue. On the other hand, the altar clearly meets many criteria of an altar according to Halacha. Rabbi Joel ben Nun dedicated a special article to them. First, the stones of the altar were not chiseled with iron, as per the law of the Torah. And in a burial pit beneath the complex were found flint hammers that apparently served for chiseling and were buried due to the holiness attributed to them. The altar is accessed by a ramp, not by steps as per the law of the Torah. Around the altar is a terrace called Sovev, as described in the book of Ezekiel, and up to the Sovev go 2 small ramps, as described in the Mishnah. The altar was built on the mother rock, for fear of graves, as described in the Mishnah. At the top of the altar there is a space called Place of the Priest's Feet, as described in the Mishnah. The altar is an altar of filling, as an altar described in the Torah by walls and filling. In the context of the ceremony conducted at the altar, Zertal also addressed the historical plausibility of the story. The topographic description leaves room for all the people to stand, a place in the upper compound for the elders and judges, and a small and upper compound for the priests and Levites, and the absence of Shechem from the view leads to the conclusion that whoever wrote the text was present at the place. On a day without wind, those standing in the valley can hear whoever speaks loudly above the altar. From south to north, the altar is seen in the geometric center of all the hills of eastern Samaria, in a construction complex with giant stones that characterize the ancient Israelis. Part of the instructions for conducting this ceremony is writing the Torah on the plaster on the stones. Interestingly, plaster shards were found in the burial pit, plaster being a very rare find from the period. There is an archaeological connection to a related site in the plains of Moab, the previous camp of Israel. Pottery similar to Mount Ebal was found. And near Mount Ebal, the Gilgal mentioned in Joshua as a station on the way to it can be identified. How did the deniers of the Bible react to such clear findings? Archaeologist Aharon Kempinski expressed opposition to the identification. In his opinion, it is a Canaanite watchtower. Kempinski published these things even before the excavation reports were published and came to his hands. 8 seasons of excavation. In his opinion, the ash is a result of destruction, while the excavation determined unequivocally that there is no layer of destruction, and the ash is a fill accumulation. Of course, a watchtower 4 meters high is worthless. There are no remains of fortifications in the tower, and all known Canaanite watchtowers are round, not rectangular. Kempinski also made an effort to justify his opposition. The intention in the words is not at all about Jebel Ebal, but it is Mount Ebal about which the book of Deuteronomy spoke, since Deuteronomy was written in the 8th or 9th century, and hence it was a holy place in its time. And why are there no remains from that time? A Nation Born, p. 200. That is, Kempinski assumes that the Torah is a late document, and hence it deals with a sacred site from a later period, while on Mount Ebal there is no late site, and thus Kempinski summarizes his words with a warning. Without information on the development of the scriptures, biblical archaeology can easily turn into theology. To these amateurish words, the media at the time joined. Nahum Barna published in 1986 in main title an article on the discovery of the altar of Katzover, Zertal's collaboration with the settlers. They want to establish a tourist site that will be the Temple Mount of Samaria. Thousands of tourists will come, a restaurant and a tourist site, and picnics are planned, new roads, etc. It's a plot to grab money. Years have passed, no conspiracy of settlers to grab money has materialized. But no serious arguments were made against the facts. In 2000, Zertal wrote, "No researcher has challenged our conclusions in writing, and no one followed Kempinski." Amichai Mazar writes, "Some researchers thought that Zertal naively compares an archaeological find to a biblical text that was dated later. It is tempting to accept his view of the cultic nature of the site and its connection to the Bible. Is it indeed naive to compare the Torah to an archaeological find? Could it not be that the things indeed were created? So far they have gone in the dogmatism of denial? In order to illustrate the disregard for what it is, we will quote the theory of Eugene Ulrich in his article, The Absence of Textual Changes from the Qumran Biblical Scrolls, how that the version Mount Ebal in Deuteronomy and in Joshua is a strange addition by the Jews against the Samaritans. Of course, he does not even hint at the fact that the altar at Mount Ebal was found, so at least it is impossible to refer to this idea as strange." Amichai Mazar, on the other hand, writes, "The excavation revealed evidence that at a stage preceding the construction of this structure, there was cultic activity at the site, and this took place at the end of the 13th century and the beginning of the 12th century. If so, it is possible that the traditions about Mount Ebal in the Bible originate from an ancient tradition about this site." The second ceremony described in Joshua 24:26 took place in the temple at Shechem, and in it, the large stone. The temple was found in excavations, the walls of which are 2.5 meters thick. There is a similarity to the tabernacle and the temple in the Bible. In its courtyard stands a large stone, and for it a stone base suitable for its placement. The excavator, Ernst Wright, says, "There is no monument in all the land whose dimensions are similar to this." Also identified in Shechem is Beth Baal Berith, mentioned in Judges. With their entry into the land, the Israelites settled the tabernacle in Shiloh, Joshua 18:1. The tabernacle was destroyed at the end of the period of the Judges, but its descriptions in the prophets were found to be authentic. In Samuel, 1 Samuel 3:15, the tabernacle of Shiloh is described as a stone house. There were researchers who doubted this description and preferred the description of the tent, but the excavation proved as described in the Bible. Finkelstein. Judges 21:19 describes the exact location of the Lord's feast, topographically very descriptive description. In Judges 21:19, behold the feast of the Lord in Shiloh. It is easy to be convinced how accurate this description is. Aharon. The very fact that the tabernacle indeed stood there is proven by the centrality of Shiloh. The number of sites in its area from the period of the settlement is several times greater than the sites in the rest of Mount Ephraim, and is also proven by its construction method. Finkelstein. The results of the excavations in Shiloh are consistent with the biblical description of the history of the place and its fate, as written in the conclusions of the excavators in the report of these excavations. Amichai Mazar. In 2009, a 3000-year-old altar horn and also a scarab from 3,000 years ago were found in Shiloh. Thank you for joining us on this fascinating journey through Israel's ancient past. We've explored the Merneptah Stele, the mysteries of Mount Ebal, and the ancient site of Shiloh, bringing us closer to understanding the historical context of the biblical narratives. What did you find most intriguing? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to Historical Veracity for more episodes from Land of History, Israel's Conquest and Biblical Archaeology Unveiled. Hit that bell icon so you never miss an episode. Next time we'll delve even deeper into the historical and archaeological insights that continue to shape our understanding of the ancient world. Until then, keep exploring, keep questioning, and as always, stay curious. Thanks for watching.